Hello, this video is going to focus on Macbeth's second visit to the witches in Act 4, Scene 1. And if we recall the end of the banquet scene, Act 3, Scene 4, Macbeth is in utter chaos. He craves some closure, he craves some clue to his fate and his future from the witches. And that is what compels this visit. Now, the previous scene to Act 4, Scene 1, which is Act 3, Scene 5, we see the witches plotting to meet with Macbeth, and we get an idea of their aims from this encounter. They say that they're hoping to raise artificial sprites, so show Macbeth some fake or falsified accounts of the future in order to, and this is the quote, to draw him on in his confusion. So the witches then, in Act 4, Scene 1, are seeking to confuse or disorientate Macbeth. They certainly do not have his best interests at heart. Now the scene kicks off with a hearty dollop of dramatic irony, because we, the audience, see the vile, toxic ingredients getting tossed into that cauldron. But Macbeth, who rocks up about 50 lines later, he does not see this. So he is not privy, he is not aware of the fact that this hell brew is basically bubbling over with evil. I mean, it's distilled evil, isn't it? What we're aware of them, and what Macbeth is not aware of, is the witch's malevolent intent. That liquid evil suggests malevolent, harmful intent. And look at some of those ingredients. You've got the poisoned entrails, the venom, the sting, the blindworm's sting, the adder's fork. These toxins act metaphorically. They're not there to poison his body. They're to carry on poisoning his mind, to induce him to further evil deeds. And it's significant that a lot of these ingredients are sourced from predatory creatures. You've got, I think it's a dragon's tooth, there's something from a wolf, the adder's fork, something from a shark as well. These are dangerous animals. Again, underlining that idea of this hell brew that Macbeth will be exposed to is going to beget harmful consequences. And unlike the rest of the characters in Macbeth, the witches communicate mainly in rhyme. Love the rhyming couplet to those girls. And one of my favourites is, by the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. They say that just as Macbeth arrives on the scene. Now, first of all, one of the reasons they communicate in rhyme, and the rest of the cast do not, is to emphasise the difference between these eerie creatures of the supernatural underworld, the witches, and the mortal characters. Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, apart from a few wibbles at the end, communicate in blank verse, iambic pentameter, 10 beats per line. That difference in the way they speak, rhyme and iambic pentameter then, rhyme for the witches, iambic pentameter for the characters, emphasises that difference in their natures. It sets the witches apart, emphasises their otherness, which is about as A-star a term as you're going to get at GCSE. It emphasises their difference or their otherness from everyone else. And one thing we can analyse very fruitfully from that rhyming couplet, by the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes, is the fact that Macbeth is described using the pronoun something. He is not described using the pronoun someone. It's almost as if the evil acts that he's committed have eroded his humanity. He's been dehumanised by these barbaric acts that he's committed to slake his lust for ambition and power. And it's kind of rendered him more of a thing than a person. And it also recalls something he said in Act 1. Do you remember he said, I think Lady Macbeth's goading him into killing the king, and he bounces back at her. He says, I dare do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is none. And you commit regicide then, and you're practically rendering yourself subhuman. You are less than human. Your humanity is the price you pay for such a sinful deed. Now we know the witches have already tossed some pretty grim bits and bobs in that cauldron before Macbeth arrives. But even after he rocks up on the scene, in front of his very eyes, they continue to add some grim ingredients, including the sweat, I think they say the grease from the murderer's gibbet. And the gibbet is basically where a convicted murderer would be hung, a kind of gallows. And I always think this is a kind of measure of Macbeth's character at this point, because he he's so blindly influenced by the witches, so enchanted by them, so enthralled to them, that he's still prepared to listen to them and their prophecies, in spite of knowing some of the ungodly ingredients being thrown into the pot. Now, the apparitions, the visions that bubble forth from this hell brew in the cauldron, include some pretty unwelcome ones. For instance, Macbeth is told to be on his guard, to beware the Thane of Fife, Macduff. On the plus side, they buck Macbeth up a bit by reassuring him that none of woman born can harm him. And then they go further, they say he'll never be defeated until great Birnam Wood comes to Macbeth's castle in Dunsinane. Now, this is precisely the reason why he bobbed over to see the witches in the first place. He craves some reassurance. He wants to know if fate has a happy ending lined up for him. You get an idea of the depth of Macbeth's depravity, the extent of his evil, when he pipes up around line 50 in Act 4, Scene 1. He basically says, do whatever you like to the world, just let me know my future. He says, the churches can topple, the corn can be blown down, castles can fall on the warders' heads. He doesn't care what chaos is wreaked upon the populace, he just wants to know his future. And another measure of Macbeth's malevolence, of his evil, is the fact that he's prepared to massacre Macduff's family, women and children all. Now, I've got a pretty rough and ready definition of evil. I think if you're prepared to butcher children to get what you want, then you're a pretty serviceable scummer. You're pretty darn evil. But if, like Macbeth, you're prepared to do these horrific deeds, kill kids, women, even when it's of no practical use to you because you've been told you're indestructible, well, that makes you a premiership scumbag. That makes you a gold standard evil bloke. On balance then, these prophecies and promises are working out pretty well for Macbeth so far. He's been told he's basically indestructible, he just has to keep a sly eye on Macduff. But now comes the witch's really bad news. Now come the really frustrating visions. Because conjured up from that hell brew, bubbling forth from that vile broth, comes a line or a parade of kings entering the stage, all looking like Banquo, and rounded off by the big man himself, the ghost of Banquo himself. And Macbeth's pain at this sight finds expression in his metaphor, thy crown does sear mine eyeballs. It physically hurts him to see this line of Banquo's descendants, just as the witches prophesied in Act 1. Banquo then really does get the last laugh here. Yes, he may have been brutally butchered by Macbeth's hired assassins, but it's his children that will go on to populate the throne. Macbeth's rule will be a barren one. He will have no children going on to the kingship. So, still reeling from the shocking news that it's Banquo's progeny that will go on to the kingship and not his, Macbeth makes himself a pledge. He says, from now on, the firstlings of my heart should be the firstlings of my hand. In other words, as soon as I get the urge to do something, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to factor in any ethical considerations. I'm not going to employ my conscience to decide whether this is a right or wrong, morally right or wrong decision. And there are some reasons why this is a very shrewd move, to just act almost on instinct. You can act very quickly, and you can also be very ruthless. But there are downsides to acting without factoring in the conscience, without weighing up the pros and the cons, the ethical implications. First of all, there's a good chance that your behaviour is going to be immoral. But perhaps more importantly, if you're not really thinking things through and just going on that blind gut instinct, there's a sizable chance that your action is going to be pretty darn stupid. So, perhaps he's sowing the seeds of his own destruction by bypassing conscience when it comes to making decisions. What is abundantly clear here, however, is that Macbeth is now all out of the milk of human kindness. His transition, his transformation, his translation from noble Macbeth to evil tyrant is complete. Given that Macbeth was an all-round good fella at the start of this play, perhaps we still have vestiges of sympathy for the character. And perhaps we can kind of sympathise with him that his visit to the witches didn't quite turn out to be the great idea it initially seemed, because the witch's prophecies, far from mollifying his fears, have in a sense amplified his frustrations. They've mixed in reassuring promises or details with disappointing ones. And it recalls to me the lines of the porter when he's talking about the effect of alcohol on sexual performance. The porter says that alcohol persuades and disheartens a man. Well, I think the witch's toxic promises, because alcohol is a toxin as well, the witch's toxic promises persuade and dishearten Macbeth in equal measure. They make him feel indestructible, but they still ensure that fear, that anxiety is gnawing away at his innards. Banquo's kids will be king, and Macduff is still one to watch. My guess then is that he's feeling just as cabined, cribbed and confined, just as trapped in, as he did when he heard that Fleance had escaped at the start of the banquet scene. By Act 5, play's end, we've worked out that the witches were equivocating with their prophecies. They weren't telling Macbeth the whole truth when they said that he would be undefeated until Birnam Wood came to Dunsinane. They neglected to mention that soldiers would be cutting down branches to camouflage themselves and shuffling towards Dunsinane, and thus it would appear that Birnam Wood was moving. Similarly, they assured him that no man of woman born would ever be able to kick his ass in battle. However, Macduff, as he admits when he goes toe-to-toe with Macbeth, is a man from his mother's womb untimely ripped, a bit like a caesarean or a C-section. So Macbeth learns the hard way that a witch is a fiend that lies like truth. That's a line from Act 5. There is a duality, there is a multiplicity to the witch's words, which confounds and confuses Macbeth and makes him assume one thing when the reality is very different. Woohoo! We are a kick up the bum off the finish line. Let's conclude. In this scene, Act 4, Scene 1, the witches speak in rhyme, and that marks them out unnervingly, unreally from the other characters. And they create dramatic irony, these witches, by reciting the horrific ingredients of their cauldron before Macbeth appears 50 lines later. Evil has clearly eroded Macbeth's humanity. He appears as something wicked, not someone. That pronoun something, very significant there. He's now so evil that he doesn't care what horrific consequences the world faces from his dabblings with the supernatural. He just wants to know his future. He's also blissfully content to massacre Macduff's family, even though it isn't necessary because he's been told he's indestructible. Clearly then, Macbeth is enchanted by the witches, and he blindly believes their words, even when he sees the witches throw some disgusting ingredients like a dead man's sweat into the cauldron. You'd think that might be a wake-up call to him. It is not. The witches' prophecies make Macbeth believe that he cannot be beaten. Alas, they also feed his fears about Banquo's descendants becoming king and Macduff's strength. So, at the end of this scene, he resolves to act without consulting his conscience, starting, of course, with that murder of Macduff's family. By the end of the scene, though, he's still leaving frustrated by the witches' mixture of positive and negative promises. Act 5 reveals all. The witches were equivocating when they said that he was indestructible. It turns out that a forest can move. It also turns out that Macduff is not of woman born. He was born of caesarean and can therefore kill Macbeth. And that's your lot, folks. Act 4, Scene 1, the witches pump Macbeth full of false hopes before sending him off to his own damnation and his own destruction.